I was 68 years old when the past came knocking quietly without warning, and in the cruelest way possible. My name is Margaret Holloway, and for 12 years, I lived alone in a house that once echoed with laughter, conversation, and a kind of quiet love that only gets built over decades of shared life. My husband, Raymond, had vanished without a trace when I was 56. One minute, he kissed my forehead and said he'd be back before dinner, and the next he was gone. No phone calls. No notes. Just the silence and 1,000 questions that never found answers. Every year since I endured my birthday like a punishment. No parties. No family. Just me, a lukewarm cup of tea, and a candle and a slice of store-bought cake. I had learned to be okay with the quiet, even convinced myself that solitude was strength. But on that particular birthday the world shifted. I was folding towels in the hallway when I heard the mailbox clang shut. First I ignored it. Junk mail, most likely. But something about the stillness afterward felt too precise, like the pause after someone says your name in a dream. My chest tightened before my legs moved. Let me quickly thank you for your continuous support. This means a lot to us. If you enjoy the stories we share, kindly subscribe to this channel. It will be great if you can leave a comment on which city you are watching from. We might just give you a shout out in our next story. Today's special shout out goes to Nicole Sanders from New York. We are glad you enjoy our stories. Now let's go deeper into the story. There was only one envelope. Cream-colored. No return address. Just my name written in familiar, almost timid handwriting. Margaret Holloway. I stared at it as my fingers trembled. I hadn't seen that handwriting in over a decade. It was his, Raymond's. I clutched the envelope like it might vanish if I blinked, then walked back inside. My knees were unsteady, and my thoughts were louder than the wind rattling the window panes. Had he been alive all this time? Was this a cruel joke played by someone who knew too much? I sat at the table, placed the envelope in front of me and just stared. I finally opened it using the blunt edge of a butter knife. Inside was a greeting card, the kind you'd find at any gas station, with gold lettering that read, "Thinking of you." I flipped it open, and there it was. 5 words scrawled in Raymond's unmistakable penmanship. I still have you in mind. Look into the basement. My heart stopped. Then it started pounding hard against my ribs. That basement door had been bolted for years. I couldn't bring myself to go down there after he disappeared. It felt like a tomb, too heavy with memory, too cold with absence. But now he wanted me to. I stood in front of the basement door longer than I'd like to admit. It looked so ordinary, and yet I felt like I was standing at the edge of something vast and irreversible. I hadn't touched that doorknob in nearly a decade. I had sealed that part of the house, and my life away. But the moment I reached for the knob and turned it, something in me clicked loose. It opened with a groan, like it resented being disturbed. I didn't bother with a flashlight. I knew every step, every creaky board, even with the bulb above long burnt out. Still, every shadow felt unfamiliar. When I reached the basement floor, a chill spread through the soles of my feet and climbed up my spine. I whispered to myself, maybe just to hear another voice. Everything looked the same. Raymond's old workbench with his dusty tools, the untouched chest freezer, the boxes of decorations I never had the energy to put up. But then I noticed something I hadn't before. Or maybe just forgotten. The wine rack against the far wall was slightly off angle. Just a few inches. But I was the one who had placed it there, and I knew it had once sat perfectly flush. Curiosity wrestled with dread. I moved the rack aside slowly, like I might find something alive beneath it. Behind it was a wooden panel in the wall, one that didn't match the others. I reached out and pressed it. It shifted inward and then gave way with a quiet click, like it had been waiting for someone to remember it existed. Behind the panel was a narrow hollow. Inside sat a rusted metal chest, maybe the size of a typewriter, with a latch that had seen better years. Scratched into the top were 3 letters. R.H. Raymond Holloway. My husband's initials. My breath caught as I knelt beside it. I didn't open it right away. My fingers hovered over the latch, then pulled away, then hovered again. I wasn't ready, but then again I'd never be. I forced myself to lift the lid. Inside were 6 videotapes, a sealed envelope, a leather-bound journal with pages crinkled by time, and a photograph that felt like a slap. In the photo, Raymond stood beside a woman I had never seen before. She was younger than me by at least a decade. His arm was around her waist and both of them were smiling, no glowing. He looked freer, happier. Beneath the photo was a folded paper, a marriage certificate. His name, her name, Elena Rosario. My throat tightened as if invisible hands were pressing against it. The date on the certificate, just 2 years before he disappeared. My Raymond had married someone else. Not long after we celebrated our 25th anniversary, he gave another woman his last name. I sank to the floor beside the chest, holding the envelope that bore my name again. "For when you're ready," it said on the front. But I wasn't ready. I was shattered. Still, I forced myself to take the first videotape and climb the stairs. Back upstairs, I pulled the old VCR from the hall closet. I had kept it only because it still worked and carried memories I wasn't ready to erase. I popped in the tape and waited. The screen flickered, fuzzed, then focused. There he was. Raymond. Older. Gaunt. Unshaven. He stared into the camera like he wasn't sure how to begin. Then he spoke. "Margaret, if you're seeing this, it means I'm gone. For real this time. And I'm sorry. I know that word can't hold the weight of everything I've done. You're going to find things that will make you question the man you thought you knew. But know this, I loved you. I never stopped. Everything I did was to protect you. And now, you're the only one who can finish what I started." The tape ended. The screen turned to static. And I sat there, heart pounding, hands shaking, staring into the emptiness where my husband's face had just been. I didn't know what Raymond meant. I didn't know what I was meant to finish. But I knew deep in my bones that whatever I'd started by opening that envelope, I couldn't go back now. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, Raymond's voice echoed in the dark, wrapping around my thoughts like a knot that refused to come loose. I must have replayed that tape in my mind a dozen times, trying to read between every word, every pause. What was he trying to protect me from? And what was it that he hadn't finished? The questions sat in my chest like stones. And even as the morning sun crawled through the window, I felt no warmth. Only a familiar numbness that had once followed me through the early years of his disappearance. I made a pot of coffee I never drank. My hands kept returning to the journal from the chest, its leather cover soft with age and worn at the corners. I hadn't opened it yet. I didn't know if I could. After discovering the photo and marriage certificate, I wasn't sure how much truth I was ready to face. I needed answers, yes, but I also needed to be steady when they came. And the truth was, I didn't trust myself not to unravel. I had spent 12 years building walls around the hole he left behind. Now those walls were cracking. Eventually, I forced myself back down to the basement. I had to make sure I hadn't imagined it all, that it hadn't been some elaborate grief-fueled dream. But the panel was still open, the box still there, half-emptied. And beside it, something I hadn't noticed before. A small square patch of concrete near the far end of the room, clean and distinct from the surrounding dust. It looked newer, out of place. I stared at it for a long time, unsure what made it feel important. Something about it prickled at the back of my mind, like a picture I'd seen before but couldn't place. I picked up the rest of the contents from the chest and carried them upstairs. There were 5 tapes left. I labeled them in the order he had marked, 1 through 6. Tape 1 had already shaken me to my core. I braced myself for tape 2. This time, I placed it in the visor without hesitation, as though the fear had numbed itself into resolve. Raymond appeared again. His face looked more tired than before, eyes hollow but clear. "Margaret," he began. "If you've watched the first tape, I know you're already hurting. I know what you found in the chest, Elena, the certificate. I won't ask for forgiveness because I don't deserve it. But I owe you the truth. The whole truth. You were never a second choice. She was never a replacement. What you found was part of something bigger. Something I got myself into years before I met her. Something dangerous." I leaned forward, every cell in my body taut. My fingers dug into the armrest. His tone had changed. This wasn't a confession about infidelity. It was a warning. "I was in over my head, Maggie," he continued. "Years ago, I was approached by a man named Denton Vale. He was charismatic, well-connected, and very persuasive. He convinced me to invest in a business, a transport network that was supposedly clean. But it wasn't. It was a cover for laundering money. I didn't know that at first. When I did, I tried to pull out. They said I was in too deep, that I'd seen too much. Elena was already involved. I thought I could use her to find a way out. She was smart, smarter than I gave her credit for. But she disappeared before I could finish what we started. The tape cut to static for a moment, then returned. Raymond looked straight into the camera. They'll come for you now. If they haven't already. That card I sent, it means they know I've been in contact. I hit something else. Something they're looking for. You'll find it when you're ready. But you need to be careful. Denton doesn't forgive loose ends. The screen went dark. I sat there in stunned silence, my thoughts spiraling in a dozen directions. A criminal network? Blackmail? Elena missing? None of it aligned with the man I married. The man who clipped coupons and loved crossword puzzles. The man who planted roses in the spring and couldn't stomach violence in movies. But people change. Or maybe we never truly know the people we love. I rubbed my temples, trying to ground myself. But the ground felt like it was shifting beneath my feet. I knew I had to open the journal. Its pages were filled with Raymond's handwriting. He'd written to me like he was telling me bedtime stories from beyond the grave. Some entries were dated months before he disappeared. Others were scattered, cryptic, fragmented thoughts. Mentions of Elena, of Denton, of the farmhouse, of the tapes and the coordinates. One entry made my blood run cold. If Margaret ever finds this, it means I failed her twice. She'll hate me. But I'd rather her hate me and live than never know the truth. I closed the journal and stared at the window. Outside, life moved on. Birds flitted from branch to branch. A dog barked in the distance. But inside I was spiraling. Somewhere between grief and rage. Between disbelief and instinct. There was no going back. The man I thought I knew was a ghost now, and the trail he left me was lined with bones and betrayal. But beneath all of that, I also felt something unexpected, purpose. For the first time in years, I had something to chase. Something to uncover. And maybe somewhere along the way, I'd find a version of myself I had lost. I went back down to the basement to inspect the new patch of concrete again. I tapped it with a wrench, solid but shallow. There was something under it. I could feel it. I made a decision then. I was going to break it open. Not today, but soon. I needed to know what else Raymond had buried, because whatever it wasn't just his past. It was mine now too. The morning I decided to break the concrete slab, I didn't even change out of my nightgown. I didn't eat breakfast. Didn't brush my hair. I just tied on Raymond's old utility apron, grabbed a hammer and chisel, and went down into that basement like I was marching into war. The air down there had always felt heavy, but now it pressed on my chest differently. Not like grief or fear, but like the weight of a truth that had finally grown tired of hiding. I knelt beside the patch and ran my hand along its edge. It wasn't just new, it was deliberate. The first strike echoed like a gunshot. I paused, half expecting the walls to crumble or the past to scream back at me. But nothing happened, just a dull ache in my wrist and dust rising in slow spirals. I chipped away at the edges, each blow louder than the last. I had never done anything like this before. I was a retired elementary school teacher, not some woman with secrets to exhume. But as chunks of cement began to flake away, I kept going. Because if Raymond had left something here, something worth hiding, then I had to see it. No matter what it was. After nearly an hour, the concrete gave way to something softer beneath. A tarp, stiff with age and stained at the corners. My breath caught in my throat. I peeled it back slowly, heart pounding. Beneath it was a metal lockbox about the size of a shoebox. No markings. No tags. Just dust and silence. I heaved it out and placed it on the workbench. My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside were files, manila folders brittle with age. Some had photos attached with paper clips. Others were stuffed with receipts, letters, handwritten notes. There were passports, IDs, multiple names, but all with Raymond's face. I stared at them in stunned silence. Each document painted a new version of the man I had married. I had known him as a husband, a gardener, a crossword enthusiast. But apparently he had also been a man named Richard Halstead. Another called Aaron Sloan. And one, under the name Patrick DeLeon, listed him as an import specialist for a company I had never heard of. The dates overlapped. Some photos had him with different hairstyles, different cities. And then there was a file labeled, Elena R. I opened it with a cold hand and a colder heart. The photo was of the same woman from the picture in the chest, smiling, unsuspecting. Inside Elena's folder were letters. Dozens. Most were typed, signed by Raymond or whatever name he used with her. Some read like love letters. Others like instructions. Mentions of money transfers, offshore accounts, and the plan. One letter, dated a year before he vanished, chilled me. If anything goes wrong with Denton, go dark. Destroy the farmhouse records. Do not contact me. I'll handle Margaret. I read that line 10 times. I'll handle Margaret. As if I were a loose end in a mission I never knew existed. My mouth went dry. I wasn't just a wife left behind. I had been a variable in something calculated. I carried the lockbox upstairs, laid the contents out on the dining table, and sat down like I was preparing to teach a lesson I wasn't qualified for. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just stared at the names, the signatures, the parallel lives, like I was waiting for one of them to tell me which version of Raymond had actually loved me, or if any had. And for the first time in a long while, I needed help. Not from a neighbor. Not from a therapist. I needed someone who could look at this mess with a trained eye. Someone I could trust not to brush me off as an old woman chasing ghosts. So I picked up the phone and called the only person who had ever believed me when the world didn't, Detective Roy Carmichael, retired. He had worked Raymond's case the year he vanished. Unlike the others, he never outright said Raymond had run off. He'd said, "People disappear for all kinds of reasons, Margaret, but that doesn't mean they want to be lost forever." He gave me his personal number when he left the force. I never used it until now. When he picked up, his voice was gravel and memory. "Margaret," he asked, "are you okay?" I wasn't. But I said, "I need you to come see something." He arrived by late afternoon. A little grayer, a little slower, but sharp as ever. When I showed him the contents of the box, his eyes narrowed. He didn't speak for several minutes. Then he leaned back in the chair and said, "This man didn't just walk away from a marriage. He walked away from an operation." And judging by these documents, he was neck-deep in something federal agencies would salivate over. He asked where I found the materials, and when I told him about the concrete slab, he let out a low whistle. "You sure there's no one else who's been in or out of this house recently?" "No one," I said, "except whoever delivered that card." Roy frowned. "Then they might already know you found this. You need to be careful, Margaret. These aren't just old secrets. They're open wounds to some very dangerous people." That night, he took photocopies of the documents and promised to run some quiet checks with his former contacts. He warned me not to trust anyone, not to speak to strangers, not to answer the door without checking the lock, and most of all, not to leave town just yet. And for the first time, I believed I might not be paranoid after all. That night, I lay in bed with Raymond's journal clutched to my chest, flipping back through entries. One caught my eye, dated 6 months before he vanished. "If Denton suspects I've backed out, he'll go after Elena first. But if Elena's gone, he'll come for Margaret. I've made sure she won't know until it's too late. Maybe ignorance is kindness. Or maybe I'm just too much of a coward." I read it again and again. My fingers curled around the page, and something inside me hardened. I wasn't going to be collateral damage. Not anymore. If Raymond had spent his final years building this twisted puzzle, then I was going to solve it piece by piece. And if Denton Vale was out there, I wanted him to know one thing. I wasn't afraid of what he buried. Not anymore. By the time morning arrived, I had made up my mind. I needed to find out who Elena Rosario really was. I couldn't keep guessing. I had to trace her life, understand how she got tangled in Raymond's mess, and more importantly, figure out what happened to her. If she had answers, or if she had left anything behind, they might be the only thing standing between me and whatever Denton had planned. I never imagined I'd be chasing the shadow of a woman my husband secretly married. But there I was, gripping a photo of them together like it was a map. Roy had called in a favor from an old contact in the DMV. Elena's last known address was a small cottage near Millhaven, a quiet lakeside town 3 hours north of me. She'd filed for a name change 2 years before she vanished, switching from Elena Rosario to Elena Vale. That last name hit me like a slap. Vale. As in Denton Vale. Coincidence? Not likely. Either they were related or she was using his name as a shield. Or a trap. I printed the photo, packed the journal, the tapes, and some clothes in a suitcase, and left a note for Roy with the exact location I'd be going. The drive to Millhaven was long and quiet. Too quiet. Every passing car felt like it might be following me. Every truck in the rearview seemed to linger too long. I hadn't left my hometown in over a decade, and now I was barreling toward the place where my husband's second life had played out like a secret stage play. By the time I reached the town, the sun was low, casting long shadows over everything. I stopped at a diner and showed the waitress the photo of Elena. She studied it carefully, then tilted her head. "She looks real familiar," she said. "Pretty thing. Used to rent the cottage behind Crooked Elm Trail. Quiet. Kept to herself. One day, she just stopped showing up." I asked if anyone had reported her missing. The waitress gave me a strange look. "That's the thing. Sheriff never found much. She'd left no trace. Rumor was she ran off with someone. Some guy who visited her a lot. Tall, kind of stiff. Didn't talk much. I didn't need a name to know she meant Raymond. My stomach turned. "You know if the cottage is still there?" I asked. She nodded and scribbled directions on a napkin. I left a large tip and headed out. The sun was dipping fast. The kind of quiet that comes before nightfall settled over everything. The cottage looked like something out of a postcard. Small, white, with peeling blue shutters and ivy climbing up one side. But it felt hollow. Dead. I approached the door and knocked, more out of habit than hope. No answer. I tried the handle. Locked. But the window near the back was cracked open, and I managed to wedge myself through with a grunt I hadn't made in decades. Inside, everything was still. There was a thin layer of dust on the shelves, but not so thick that it seemed untouched for 12 years. Someone had been in and out since then. Recently, I moved slowly, every creak of the floorboards pulling my nerves tighter. I scanned the bookshelf, checked the drawers, felt under furniture, until I found a loose floorboard near the foot of the bed. Beneath it was a box no bigger than a shoebox. I opened it. Inside were several Polaroids, most of Raymond and Elena, some at the lake, others by a fireplace I didn't recognize. But one photo made my blood freeze. It was of me. Not a photo I'd ever taken. It looked like it was taken from behind glass, possibly a window, while I was hanging laundry in my backyard. Raymond had been watching me, stalking me. After he vanished, I dropped the photo and sat back, breath shallow. Had he been checking in on me all this time? Why hide? Why lie? I picked up another picture. This one was a blurred shot of a man I didn't recognize, speaking with Elena near a black SUV. The next item in the box was a flash drive taped beneath the lid. I pocketed it and stood up, suddenly desperate to leave. The sun had fully set, and I didn't like the feeling crawling along my spine. I returned to the car, locked every door, and drove to the nearest motel, a rundown place called The Pines. Inside the room, I borrowed the motel's old laptop and plugged in the flash drive. It was encrypted, password protected, but one file name stood out. Margaret_proof. My hands went cold. I tried Raymond's birthday. Denied. I tried our wedding date. Nothing. Finally, I typed in Elena's name. The screen blinked and opened. Dozens of documents and videos spilled out, bank statements, wire transfers, emails. The emails were between Raymond and someone named V. Dentonvale, I assumed. One stood out above the rest. If she finds out, everything we've built will come apart. Elena's loyalty is slipping. You know what that means. The words struck like ice. The date of the email was just weeks before Elena disappeared. Then I opened a video file. It was grainy from a hidden camera. It showed Raymond and Elena in a heated argument in what looked like the very cottage I had just left. The audio was faint, but I heard enough. Elena shouting, "You can't protect her by hiding the truth," and Raymond's voice cold and sharp. "She's safer not knowing. And if you talk to Denton, you'll disappear too." The video cut out abruptly. I stared at the screen, heart racing. Elena had known about me. She had wanted to tell me, and now she was gone. Suddenly, everything snapped into focus. Elena hadn't vanished, she had been erased. Likely by the same man who now might be watching me. Raymond had tried to protect me, yes, but through control, through silence, through lies stacked so high I couldn't see daylight. And Denton. He wasn't some name on a file anymore. He was real, dangerous, still out there. And he'd notice I was stirring up the dust. I locked the motel door, pushed a chair under the knob, and sat in the corner with the journal in my lap. Raymond had scribbled another line near the end that I hadn't noticed before. If she follows Elena's trail, she'll find the farmhouse. She'll find what we couldn't destroy. I underlined those words 3 times. If there was something left, something Elena had tried to show me, then I had to go find it. Not just for answers. Not just for closure. But because someone had gone to great lengths to make sure I never would. And now, I wasn't just chasing ghosts anymore. I was preparing for war. I woke up before the sun, sitting upright in that hard motel chair, the weight of Raymond's journal open on my lap, and the flash drive still humming in the borrowed laptop beside me. I didn't remember falling asleep. The last thing I recalled was replaying the video of Elena arguing with Raymond, trying to read her lips, searching for any clue I had missed. I had watched it too many times. Each time chipped away at the man I thought I'd married. By dawn, there wasn't much left of him. Just a name on forged documents, and a face I barely recognized. The air outside was damp with early fog, but I didn't wait for it to lift. I checked out of the motel, thanked the night clerk who hadn't said a word to me in 2 days, and got back on the road with one destination in mind. The farmhouse. The final entry in Raymond's journal had circled back to it again and again. The farmhouse has everything, he wrote. If she finds it, she'll understand what I couldn't say out loud. I was trying to protect her, not keep her blind. I hope she believes that. But belief wasn't something I was offering freely anymore. Roy had called while I was packing the car. You're walking into something you can't undo, Margaret, he warned. Denton Vale doesn't just erase people. He erases evidence, witnesses, trails. You're not trained for this kind of thing. Neither was Raymond, I said quietly. And look where it got him. There was silence on the other end. Then Roy said, "At least let me meet you there. Just don't go in alone." I gave him the coordinates, remote rural outside a town called Claremont. He said he'd be there by noon. That gave me 4 hours to get to the truth before the cavalry arrived. The road to the farmhouse was the kind of road people don't find by accident. Overgrown trees pressed in on both sides, and the gravel beneath my tires crunched like broken bones. I passed 2 abandoned barns, 1 rusted fence, and no other signs of life. When I finally reached the clearing, the farmhouse stood alone, quiet as a tomb. Weather-worn with paint peeling like skin and boards missing from the porch, it looked like a place meant to be forgotten. But I hadn't come all this way to turn back. I stepped out, heart-thudding, senses sharp.
No birds chirped.
No breeze stirred the grass. It felt like the world had paused, holding its breath. I climbed the creaking steps and found the front door unlocked. Inside it was colder than I expected. Dust curled in the sunlight like cigarette smoke, and the faint scent of mildew clawed at the air. I moved room by room, careful with every step. Most of the rooms were empty. A chair here, a broken table there. But then in the back of the house I found something strange. A set of floorboards cleaner than the rest. I knelt down. One was loose. I pried it open and found a wooden hatch, sealed with a rusted padlock. I used the same chisel I'd brought from home to snap it open. Below was a ladder descending into darkness. I hesitated only for a moment, then climbed down, flashlight in hand. The basement beneath the farmhouse was cramped, lined with old furniture and dusty crates. But at the far end, hidden behind a curtain of old bedsheets, was a single object that stole my breath. A metal filing cabinet, scorched at the corners but still intact. I opened it. Inside were more documents, more photos, and a bag. Inside the bag were rolls of cash, dozens of them. And tucked beneath them, a final videotape, labeled in black marker, Tape 6, Watch Alone. My fingers trembled as I took it. I climbed out of the basement, returned to the car, and played the tape through a portable player I'd borrowed from Roy. The screen crackled, and then Raymond's face appeared once more. Older now, weaker. His voice was raspy. "If you're watching this, Margaret, then you've come farther than I ever did. That farmhouse was supposed to be our clean slate. Mine and Elena's. She thought we could expose Denton, bring him down. But she didn't understand how deep his reach went. He found out. He made her disappear. And then he sent me a warning. Stay buried or you'll join her." I ran. "I watched you from a distance. I never stopped watching. You were the only thing I got right." He paused, breathing shallow. The money you found. It's enough to start over. To disappear if you need to. But that's not what I want you to do. I want you to finish what we started. The evidence in that farmhouse. It's enough to bury Denton if it's handled right. Roy can help. Trust him. But if you can't do it, if it's too much, I'll understand. Just know I didn't leave because I stopped loving you. I left because I couldn't let you be collateral. I was a coward, Margaret. But you? You're stronger than I ever was. The tape ended. My hands were cold, but my mind was burning. The pieces were all there. The fake identities. The blackmail. Elena's death. Raymond's escape. The evidence that could destroy Denton. And the final choice, whether to run or fight. I sat there in the car, gripping the steering wheel, until I saw Roy's truck coming up the road. When he stepped out, he looked at me for a long time before asking, "Well, did you find it?" "Yes," I said. "And I'm done being part of someone else's story." It was time to write the ending myself. I never imagined that the ending to someone else's story would begin with me holding a gun I didn't know how to use. Roy had brought it, wrapped in an old towel, and placed it on the passenger seat when we met by the farmhouse. "Just in case," he'd said, as if those words could make me feel any less terrified. I didn't ask where he got it. I didn't want to know. All I knew was that Denton Vale was real, that Elena was dead because she tried to expose him, and that Raymond had spent his last years trying to stay one step ahead of a man who erased lives like chalk on a sidewalk. We took everything from the hidden basement. Files, documents, burner phones, ledgers, photos, and packed them into boxes. Roy said his contact at the bureau would meet him the next morning, someone clean, someone who'd help deliver the evidence without tipping Denton off. But I didn't feel safe waiting until morning. The whole drive back home, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching us. Roy tried to calm me, saying paranoia was natural, but I wasn't imagining things. The same SUV had tailed us for miles before turning off near a gas station. And the way the gas clerk stared too long when I walked in? That wasn't paranoia. That was a man who recognized something. By the time we reached my house, the sun was setting. Roy insisted on staying the night. "I'm not letting you out of my sight now," he said, voice like gravel. I didn't argue. We moved the boxes into my living room, double-locked the doors, and set up a system of makeshift alarms. Brooms wedged against doorknobs, pots stacked on window sills. It felt ridiculous, like I was preparing for a war in a suburban home. But something about it all felt necessary. We both knew this wasn't over. Just after midnight I heard it, the sound of a footstep outside the back door. Not the creak of the house, not the wind. A real deliberate step. I froze. Roy, already awake, signaled me to stay back as he moved toward the door. But before he could reach it, the living room window shattered inward. Someone threw something metal, cylindrical, through the glass. It hit the floor and rolled. Smoke hissed from it. A flash grenade. We were being raided. Roy shouted, "Down!" and tackled me behind the couch. I couldn't breathe. The air turned thick with smoke. Shapes moved in the haze. 2 of them, maybe 3, dressed in black, faces covered. Roy fired once, hitting the wall. One of them returned fire, but it wasn't a bullet. It was a dart. Roy went down, twitching. I screamed and reached for the gun he'd given me. I didn't aim. I didn't even think. I pulled the trigger, heard one of the masked figures grunt and fall. I ran. I bolted for the basement door, heart pounding so hard I couldn't hear. Behind me, footsteps. Shouts. I threw the door open, ran down the stairs, and yanked open the same panel I had once been too afraid to touch. Inside was the crawl space. But now I noticed something else. Something I hadn't seen before, a trapdoor in the floor, beneath a loose rug I hadn't thought twice about. Raymond's final tape had mentioned a trap. This was it. I flung the rug aside and pried the door open. Below it, a steep wooden ladder descended into blackness. I didn't hesitate. I climbed down, pulled the hatch shut, and lay in the dark. My breath was loud in my ears. My whole body trembled. Above, I heard the intruders crash into the basement. One of them shouted, "She's not here." Another cursed. And then silence. I waited. Minutes passed. Maybe hours. I couldn't tell. When I finally climbed back up, they were gone. The house was torn apart. Roy was still breathing barely. I called an ambulance and didn't tell them the truth, just that there'd been a break-in. When the paramedics arrived, I handed them the gun and told them I found it after the intruders fled. The questions could wait. Roy was alive. That's what mattered. The rest of the night I didn't sleep. I gathered every remaining piece of evidence, made copies, sent digital backups to an encrypted drive Roy had given me, and then I did the one thing Raymond never had the courage to do. I went public. I uploaded the files anonymously, sent packages to news outlets, to the Bureau, to every agency that might care. I didn't wait for permission. I didn't wait for safety. I just hit send. Because someone had tried to kill me in my own home. Because Roy had almost died. Because Elena had died. And because I was done being silent. If Denton Vale wanted to hide, he'd have to do it under the weight of 1,000 eyes now. Because I had cracked the trapdoor wide open. And what he buried, I unearthed it. The days that followed felt like the sky had cracked open. My quiet life, the years of aching silence, the unanswered questions, the self-contained grief, was suddenly under a spotlight. The packages I sent worked. Within 48 hours I received a message through Roy's encrypted system. Denton Vale had gone off the radar. But the Bureau had issued warrants. The media caught wind of it too. Mysterious whistleblower leaks files tied to missing business mogul, was the first headline. My name wasn't in the news, but I knew it would only be a matter of time. Roy survived. He'd taken a tranquilizer dart laced with something experimental, courtesy of whatever group Denton had working for him. He recovered slowly, and every time he opened his eyes in that hospital bed, he asked the same question. Did you send it all? I nodded each time, and he'd close his eyes again with a smile, like that answer made every bruise worth it. He was right. The information we had uncovered was too big to keep buried. It detailed shell corporations, forged identities, off-the-book accounts, all leading back to Denton Vale and the dozens of lives he'd ruined or erased to protect his empire. I stayed off the grid for the next week, took refuge at a lake house Roy's sister owned, small, hidden, peaceful in a way that made me feel human again. But even in that peace I couldn't stop thinking about Raymond, about Elena, about the trapdoor in the farmhouse and the moment I had stood in my own basement with smoke in the air, gun in hand, and fear burning in my lungs. I had never seen myself as someone brave. Not when I taught third grade. Not when I first stood alone in that house after Raymond vanished. And certainly not when I opened that first letter. But I saw it now. I had done what Raymond couldn't. Not because I was stronger, but because I had something he never gave himself, a second chance. When I finally opened the envelope he'd left me in the chest, it wasn't a confession or a map. It was a letter. Short. Honest. Just 6 lines that gutted me. Maggie, if you're reading this, then you're already carrying more than you deserve. I'm sorry for what I became. Sorry for what I couldn't finish. But I know you, and I know you'll see this through. I never stopped loving you. Not once. R. I folded that letter and put it in my coat pocket, where it stayed for weeks. A part of me still hated him, for the lies, the betrayal, for turning my life into something unrecognizable. But another part, the quieter part, had already begun to grieve him properly. For the man I thought he was. For the man he tried to become. And for the man who, even in hiding, still reached for me with trembling hands. The authorities arrested 2 of Denton's men in the week that followed. Their testimonies cracked open the rest. Denton didn't go quietly. He tried to disappear. But a man like that, with that many enemies and that many secrets, only hides for so long. When they finally caught him crossing the border into Belize, the photos made headlines across the country. His empire crumbled within days. Victims came forward. Families that thought their loved ones had simply walked out came with old journals, old rumors, new grief. It became bigger than me. Bigger than Raymond. But I had lit the match. 3 months later, I returned to the farmhouse. Roy came with me. He said I didn't have to go back, that it would only reopen old wounds. But I told him I needed to. For myself. For Elena. For Raymond. The house was empty, cleared by the feds, but still standing. I walked through each room slowly. The bedroom. The kitchen. The basement. I stood above the trapdoor and stared down into the dark. And then I lit a single candle and left it there, flickering against the silence. Before we left, I buried a small box behind the house. Inside it, I placed the photo of Raymond and Elena, the last letter he wrote me, And the wedding ring I hadn't taken off until the night he sent that birthday card. I didn't say a prayer. I didn't cry. I just pressed the dirt flat and walked away. I wasn't erasing them. I was releasing them. When we returned home, Roy handed me a manila envelope with a small smile. Official recognition, he said. Anonymous whistleblower status. You won't be named, but they know what you did. Inside was a letter from a federal agency. Gratitude, protection guarantees, and a single line that stayed with me. You saved lives by stepping forward. We won't forget. For once someone saw me, not as a victim, not as a widow, not as the woman left behind, but as the woman who dug up the truth and refused to be buried with it. Now I live quietly again. I tend to the garden. I drink my coffee while watching the morning mist roll over the yard. But I'm not waiting anymore. Not for answers. Not for apologies. And certainly not for someone to tell me what I already know. I faced the darkness below, and I walked out of it standing tall. If this story held you from start to finish, take a moment to like, subscribe, and share it with someone who appreciates a gripping emotional journey. Your support helps us bring more powerful stories like this to life, and we have many more on the way. Stay tuned. See you soon in the next one.